In June 1944, a decorated SS colonel established his headquarters inside a medieval abbey outside Caen, France. Within days of the Allied landings, Canadian prisoners were brought through its gates. What happened next would follow him for the rest of his life and put him in the dock of the first war crimes trial Canada ever conducted. His name was Kurt Meyer. His men called him Panzermeyer. On April 13, 1941, Kurt Meyer's reconnaissance battalion stalled on the slopes of the Klissora Pass in northern Greece. The Greek 20th Division held the heights above the road, and machine gun fire had pinned his men in place. Officers reported the advance was impossible. Meyer, commanding from the front as always, disagreed. He pushed forward himself, exposed on the slope, until his battalion followed. By late that evening, the town of Krastoria had fallen and approximately 1,100 prisoners had been taken. His superiors awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on May 18, 1941. His men gave him something else, a nickname, Panzermeyer. None of it began in Normandy. Kurt Meyer was born in 1910 in Yerxheim, a small town in Brunswick, into a working-class family with no obvious path into history. He drifted through jobs, joined the police, and found his direction in the Nazi Party, which he joined in 1930, 3 years before Hitler came to power. By 1934, he was inside the most elite unit in Himmler's organization, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. Meyer participated in the annexation of Austria in 1938 and the occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939 before the real war began. In Poland in September 1939, he commanded the LSSAH's anti-tank company, was shot through the shoulder on September 9th, and refused to leave his unit. The invasion of France in 1940 brought further decoration and a move into the reconnaissance role that defined his reputation, leading from the front, often on motorcycle, expecting the same of every man behind him. It was in Greece, at the Klissora Pass, that reputation became legend. On the Eastern Front with Army Groups South from June 1941 onward, that legend grew darker. Meyer's battalion drove deep into Ukraine, captured the port city of Mariupol, and earned him the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross on February 23, 1943. But the Eastern Front was not only a story of battlefield audacity. Historians have documented that units under Meyer's command were involved in the killing of civilians in Ukraine during the Kharkov operations of early 1943, a pattern of violence that Allied investigators would later note when building their case against him. In the summer of 1943, he was transferred to Belgium to command a regiment within a division still being assembled from teenagers. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was being built in Meyer's image, and that image contained more than one side. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend had been built around a core of veteran SS non-commissioned officers drawn from the Leibstandarte, men who had spent years on the Eastern Front. Around that core, the division packed in recruits aged 17 to 19, most of them former Hitler Youth members who had been raised inside the ideology since childhood. By the time Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the division had trained for nearly a year in Belgium and northern France. Meyer, commanding the 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, had shaped those young soldiers in his own image, aggressive, fanatical, and contemptuous of hesitation. When news of the landings arrived, the division took several hours to receive clearance to move, delayed by conflicting orders from a command structure still unsure whether Normandy was the main invasion. By mid-afternoon on June 6th, elements were finally advancing toward the coast. Meyer established his regimental headquarters at the Ardennes Abbey, a large medieval monastery on the outskirts of Caen whose stone towers gave a clear view of the surrounding countryside. From those towers on June 7th, he watched Canadian forces advancing toward the village of Otti. Seeing an exposed flank, he ordered the regiment to counterattack ahead of schedule. The fighting that followed was ferocious. Soldiers of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the 27th Canadian Armoured Regiment, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, were hit hard around Otti and Baronne. Dozens of Canadians were captured and brought back to the Ardennes Abbey. That night and the following morning, 20 of those prisoners were taken into the Abbey garden and shot. A Polish conscript serving in the 12th SS, Private Jan Jesienek, later testified to Canadian investigators that he had witnessed Meyer's response on learning that prisoners had arrived, and that an order was given to deny quarter. Between June 7th and 17th, 1944, Canadian investigators ultimately determined that up to 156 prisoners of war had been executed by soldiers of the 12th SS at scattered locations across Normandy. On June 14th, Divisional Commander SS Brigadeführer Fritz Witt was killed by Allied naval gunfire. 2 days later, Meyer took command of the entire division at the age of 33, a force already depleted, fighting on ground it could not hold. Through July and into August, the division was ground down around Caen until the Falaise pocket closed in. Meyer, wounded during the fighting, led the remnants of his division out of encirclement on foot. What had been 20,000 men was now around 1,500. On August 27th, he received the swords to his Knight's Cross, becoming the 91st recipient of that decoration. On September 6th, he was captured near Durnal in Belgium. The men who survived the pocket with him never questioned his courage. The Canadians who had been brought through the Abbey gates in June had no say in the matter. What Meyer knew and what Allied investigators were already piecing together would soon collide in a German courtroom. The courtroom in Aurich was, in a narrow sense, the place where the question in every headline about Kurt Meyer finally had to be answered formally. Was he a soldier who fought hard, or a commander who let his men kill prisoners? The prosecution said both things could be true at once. Meyer arrived in Aurich at the same posture he had maintained since his capture, calm, military, and unyielding. He sat through proceedings in uniform, denied every charge, and offered a counter-narrative that any prisoners killed by his men had been taken as reprisals for Canadian orders to take no prisoners. Nothing in his bearing suggested a man who believed he had anything to answer for. On November 17, 1944, Meyer was transferred to Trent Park, a country estate in North London that British intelligence had wired with hidden microphones. The transcripts of conversations recorded there would later form part of the analysis published by historians Sönke Neitzel and Harald Welzer in their 2011 book Soldaten. Meyer, unaware he was being recorded, expressed views that left little room for ambiguity. He described himself as an ideological warrior, praised Hitler for reviving German self-confidence, and criticized Wehrmacht officers he considered insufficiently fanatical. When Allied interrogators pressed him directly about war crimes in Normandy, he denied everything. The investigation that would unravel that denial had begun more than a year earlier. In August 1944, Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Bruce MacDonald was appointed to lead the Canadian War Crimes Commission's investigation into the prisoner deaths. His team interviewed 114 witnesses, German and Canadian, across POW camps on both sides of the Atlantic. The breakthrough came through Jan Jesienek, a Polish conscript who had served in the 12th SS and was present at the Ardennes Abbey on June 8, 1944. MacDonald tracked him down in Marseille and took him back to the Abbey to reconstruct what he had seen. Jesienek testified that before the Canadians were led out one by one into the garden, the men shook hands with each other and said their goodbyes. SS deserters confirmed the rest. Troops under Meyer's command had been ordered to take no prisoners. In December 1945, a Canadian military court convened in the German town of Aurich. Meyer faced 5 charges in total. He was acquitted on the counts relating to the killings near Auty and Baronne on June 7th, where the court determined the evidence did not directly link him to those specific deaths. But on 2 counts he was found guilty, inciting troops under his command to take no prisoners and bearing command responsibility for the deaths of Canadian prisoners at the Ardennes Abbey. On December 28, 1945, he was sentenced to death, the first German officer to receive that sentence from a Canadian military tribunal. The sentence did not stand for long. On January 14, 1946, Major General Christopher Vokes commuted it to life imprisonment. Vokes concluded that Meyer bore clear responsibility as a commander, but without a direct written order, the death sentence was difficult to sustain. The reaction across Canada was immediate. The Toronto Star ran an editorial titled "Protest's Hero" on January 17, 1946. The Globe and Mail called it a bewildering decision. In newspapers from coast to coast, Meyer was referred to as Canada's #1 war criminal. In the eyes of many readers, he had been handed his freedom on a legal technicality. For the families of the men who had died in Normandy, the commutation was not a juridical distinction, it was a door closing on justice. In April 1946, Meyer was transferred to Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick. The trial's deeper significance extended well beyond the verdict. For the first time, a commander was held accountable for crimes carried out by his subordinates, a principle that would later be codified in international law. Inside his Canadian prison cell, Meyer still had allies, and they were already working toward his release. The campaign to free Kurt Meyer began almost as soon as he arrived in Canada. West Germany was being rebuilt as a key partner against the Soviet Union, and West German politicians argued that keeping a convicted officer in a foreign prison complicated the diplomatic relationship between Bonn and Ottawa. The argument carried weight. In 1951, with Canadian approval, Meyer was transferred from Dorchester Penitentiary to a British military prison at Werl in West Germany. His sentence was quietly reduced to 14 years. On September 7, 1954, after serving fewer than 9 years, he walked free. A large crowd gathered to welcome him home in Hagen, where he eventually settled and worked as a beer distributor. Meyer moved quickly back into public life. He became a leading figure in HIAG, the veterans' lobby group founded in 1951 by former SS generals including Paul Hauser and Felix Steiner. In 1957, he published his memoir Grenadiere, later translated into English as Grenadiers. Historian Charles W. Sidner said it might be the most confrontational work from the HIAG network. The book framed Meyer's wartime career as a story of professional soldiering and personal courage, with the crimes of the 12th SS treated as either peripheral or unproven. In 1959, Meyer was appointed HIAG's official spokesman. At a rally attended by approximately 8,000 former SS men in Carlsberg, Bavaria, he declared that SS troops had committed no crimes apart from one isolated incident, a claim that directly contradicted the findings of his own trial and the testimony of multiple witnesses. Historians have since dismantled that narrative in detail. Howard Margolian's 1998 book, Conduct Unbecoming, details the 156 Canadian deaths in Normandy. Written after years as a war crimes investigator for Canada's Department of Justice, it explores the culture of the 12th SS that allowed these killings to happen. Legal scholar Craig Forcese examined the Aurich trial in 2020. He called it a key moment for command responsibility doctrine. The principles set in this trial shaped later international legal frameworks. Kurt Meyer died on December 23, 1961, his 51st birthday in the Rhineland. He was buried with military honors. In the Abbey garden outside Caen, the names of the 20 Canadians who died there in June 1944 were carved into the wall in 1984, 40 years after the fact. For more on the world the Waffen-SS left behind, watch What Happened to the Waffen-SS After World War II next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more history inside, and we'll see you in the next one.